The stool left my hands before my brain even processed what I was doing. I remember the sound it made, that hollow crack of wood against the wall, inches from her head. And I remember my mother-in-law stumbling backward, clutching the doorframe, her face shifting from rage to something I'd never seen on her before. Fear. Pure animal fear. And I remember standing there in my own kitchen, breathing like I'd just sprinted a mile, my hands shaking, my voice coming out low and flat in a way that didn't even sound like me. "Looks like you're tired of living," I said. My 6-year-old daughter, Cora, was crouched against the kitchen cabinet with a red welt rising across the back of her thigh. She wasn't even crying anymore. She'd gone completely silent, the way kids go silent when the pain gets past a certain point and the body just shuts the sound off. That silence, that terrible, airless silence, is what I still hear when I wake up at 3 in the morning. But to understand how I got to that moment, you have to go back. Not just a few weeks. You have to go back 24 years to a Rust Belt city in western Pennsylvania that most people only know because their grandparents used to work in the steel mills there. I grew up in Allegheny Falls. It's the kind of place where the main street still has the bones of a prosperous industrial town. Wide sidewalks, old brick storefronts, a Carnegie Library on the corner, but half the buildings have been empty since the 90s. The mill closed before I graduated high school, and after that, the town just sort of exhaled and never fully breathed in again. People stayed, though. That's the thing about places like Allegheny Falls. The roots go deep, even when the soil goes bad. I met Dennis Greer at a 4th of July cookout when I was 25. He was 30, already working in commercial real estate development, loud in a charming way, the kind of man who fills a room without meaning to. His family had been in Allegheny Falls for 3 generations. His father, Gerald Greer, had made a modest fortune buying up distressed industrial properties in the 80s and 90s, when everyone else was running. By the time I met Dennis, the Greer family name carried a particular weight in that town. Not exactly respected, not exactly feared, somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. I was working as a junior agent at a small realty office on Caldwell Avenue. I'd gotten my license 2 years earlier and was starting to build a client base. Dennis thought it was charming, me selling houses while he sold entire city blocks. He used to joke about it at family dinners, and I used to laugh, because back then I thought that kind of teasing was affection. We got married 18 months after we met. It was March, a gray, sleety Saturday, in the function hall above an Italian restaurant on 5th Street. Nothing fancy. Gerald paid for the open bar and acted like that made him the patriarch of a dynasty. I should tell you about Gerald right now, because he matters more to this story than almost anyone else. Gerald Greer was 71 years old when everything fell apart. He was a compact, dry-voiced man with small eyes the color of old asphalt. He'd been widowed when Dennis was 12, and he'd raised Dennis and Dennis's older sister, Paulette, with what I can only describe as strategic indifference, providing money, withholding warmth, and making sure everyone understood that his generosity was always a loan, never a gift. He was the kind of man who kept mental ledgers on every favor, every dollar, every concession. He never forgot what anyone owed him. He never forgot anything. His wife, Dennis's mother, had died of a heart attack, and Gerald had remarried 8 years later to a woman named Connie. Connie was the one who was in my kitchen that April afternoon. She was Gerald's second wife, technically my mother-in-law by marriage to Dennis, though she'd always insisted the kids call her Grandma Connie and pretended the step prefix didn't exist. She was 63, heavy-set, with dyed auburn hair and a habit of filling silence with opinions nobody asked for. The first 12 years of my marriage were not unhappy. I want to be honest about that. Dennis had his flaws. He was conflict avoidant. He deferred to his father on almost everything, and he could be thoughtless in the specific way that comfortable men are thoughtless, forgetting that the world required maintenance he wasn't providing. But he wasn't cruel. He worked hard. He came home. We built something together, Dennis and I, in that old industrial city where both of our families had planted themselves for reasons that made more sense 100 years ago than they did now. By the time I turned 40, I wasn't a junior agent anymore. I had my broker's license, my own small firm, 4 agents working under me, nothing spectacular, but mine. We specialized in residential properties in Allegheny Falls and 3 surrounding townships. I knew every street, every zoning quirk, every flood-prone basement in a 2-county radius. In a town where the real estate market moved slowly and painfully, I'd figured out how to make it move. Cora was born when I was 43. Late, yes. We'd had 1 miscarriage before her, and then a long stretch of nothing. And then Cora arrived in November, like a small, furious correction to everything that had gone wrong before. She had Dennis's dark hair and, apparently, my stubbornness. She was the kind of kid who asked why about everything and remembered your answer verbatim a year later. By the time she was 6, she could already read chapter books and was deeply suspicious of anyone who talked down to her. Gerald adored her, in his way. That is, he wanted to own her the same way he owned everything else he valued. He'd taken to showing up at our house unannounced, bringing Connie with him, treating our kitchen like an extension of his own. Dennis never pushed back on this. He never pushed back on anything his father did. That was the slow fracture in our marriage, the one I'd been spackling over for 2 decades without admitting to myself that the wall was cracking through. The April that everything started was unseasonably warm. That particular spring came in fast and greedy. By the first week of the month, the old maples on our block were already leafed out, and kids were riding bikes in t-shirts. Allegheny Falls looked almost pretty in that light, the way a worn-out face looks better in the right afternoon sun. I remember feeling something close to contentment during those first 2 weeks of April. Business was picking up. I had a listing on a renovated Victorian on Hartwell Street that was getting serious interest. Cora was thriving in kindergarten. Dennis seemed lighter than he'd been in months. I should have known better. In my experience, contentment is rarely a stable condition. It's usually just the pause before the next thing lands. The first sign came on a Tuesday evening, 3rd week of April. I came home from showing a property to find Gerald's black Buick in our driveway. Not unusual, except it was nearly 7 o'clock, and Gerald rarely came by after 6. I walked in to find him and Dennis at the kitchen table, with a folder of papers spread between them. Dennis looked up when I came in, and something crossed his face, too fast, a reflex, something that looked like guilt before he rearranged it into a smile. "Hey, sweetheart. Dad stopped by to go over some stuff." "What stuff?" I set my bag down and looked at the papers without touching them. Gerald reached out and closed the folder. Not aggressively, just smoothly, like closing a laptop when someone walks into a room. The gesture was so practiced it was almost invisible. "Property business," he said. "Nothing that concerns your office." I looked at Dennis. Dennis looked at the closed folder. "Okay," I said, because I was tired from a long day and I didn't have the energy to push. "I'll start dinner." But I noticed, as I moved around the kitchen, that Dennis kept his hand flat on top of that folder the whole time Gerald was there. Like he was holding it down. Like he was afraid it might open on its own. Gerald left around 8. Dennis said he was tired and went to bed early. I stayed up, sitting at that same kitchen table with a glass of water, staring at the spot where the folder had been. I'd been a licensed real estate broker for more than 20 years. I knew what property documents looked like. I knew what people looked like when they were hiding them. I told myself I was imagining things. I almost believed it. 3 days later, I got a call from the Allegheny County Recorder of Deeds office. A woman named Sandra asked if I could come in to verify some information related to a property transfer that had been flagged during routine review. She mentioned the address. It was a parcel of land that Dennis and I jointly owned. A small commercial lot on the edge of town that we'd bought 6 years ago as an investment, planning to sell when the market improved. What kind of information? I asked. There was a brief pause on her end. Professional, careful. The transfer documents we received list only one owner's signature, she said. But county records show the property is jointly held. We just need to confirm the authorization was complete. My stomach dropped 4 floors in 1 second. I haven't signed anything, I said. Another pause. Ms. Greer, Sandra said, I think you should come in person. I drove to the Recorder of Deeds office the next morning. Sandra met me at the front counter, a small woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the kind of careful, neutral expression that people in county offices develop after years of delivering bad news without technically saying anything. She slid a copy of the transfer document across the counter without preamble. I looked at the signature line. My name was there. Neatly printed, then signed in a looping cursive that was close to mine but not quite right. The capital M slightly too rounded, the tail on the G too short. I'd signed thousands of real estate documents in my career. I knew my own signature the way a musician knows their own handwriting in sheet music. This isn't my signature, I said. Sandra nodded once, slowly, like she'd expected exactly those words. The notarization is also irregular, she said quietly. The notary stamp is registered to a Leonard Pollard out of Greenfield Township. We've had questions about his work before. I stood there looking at my forged name on a document transferring a jointly held $180,000 commercial lot to a single-member LLC. The LLC was called Greer Capital Horizon. I'd never heard of it. I pulled out my phone right there at the counter and looked it up in the State Business Registry. It had been formed 11 weeks ago. The registered agent was Gerald Greer. I drove home in a state of such cold, precise calm that I frightened myself. I didn't cry. I didn't call Dennis. I sat in my car in our driveway for 6 minutes, looking at the brick face of the house Dennis and I had bought together 14 years ago, and I did arithmetic. The commercial lot was $180,000, but that wasn't the only property Dennis and I held jointly. We had a rental duplex on Mercer Street that we'd been collecting rent on for 9 years, worth around $210,000 at current market, maybe more. We had equity in our house, and I had my brokerage, which was in my name alone, but which relied on goodwill and client relationships that Dennis, or Gerald, could damage simply by talking. The calm held until I walked inside and found Dennis sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reading something on his phone with a perfectly relaxed expression. "Hey," he said without looking up. "You're back early." "I went to the recorder's office," I said. He looked up then. "I saw the transfer document," I said, "the one with my forged signature on it." The color left his face in a single, clean drain, like water going out of a bathtub. He set his phone down. He didn't say anything for a moment, and in that moment, I understood 2 things simultaneously. He knew exactly what I was talking about, and he hadn't expected me to find out this fast. "It's not what you think," he said. "Dennis." My voice was very quiet. "Don't." My father needed to move some assets for a business reason. It's temporary, The lot was going to be transferred back. Your father forged my signature on a legal real estate document, I said. That's fraud. That is a felony. Nobody was trying to steal from you. It is not your father's property to move. It is not yours to authorize. My name is on that deed, and my name was forged without my knowledge or consent. I sat down across from him. How many other documents, Dennis? He looked at the table. How many other documents? I said again, and this time it wasn't a question. He was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Just the one, he finally said. I swear to you. Just the lot on Caldwell. The lot is on Mercer, I said. The lot on Caldwell is my office. He looked up sharply. I know that. I meant Mercer. Then why did you say Caldwell? He said nothing. I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and I called my attorney. Not a divorce attorney, not yet, but Renata Diaz, who had done contract work for my brokerage for years, and who I trusted more than almost anyone I knew professionally. I told her in 3 sentences what I had found at the recorder's office. She told me not to sign anything, not to move any money, and to come see her at 2 o'clock. I hung up and sat there in the bedroom I shared with my husband of 13 years, listening to him not moving in the kitchen, and I felt the floor of my life crack open under me like ice in March. That was the beginning of the worst 6 weeks of my life. Dennis went to his father's that night. He didn't announce it, didn't argue, didn't try to explain further. He just packed a bag quietly while I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, and he left. Cora was at my mother's for the week, a standing arrangement we had every April when my mother, Darlene, came up from Pittsburgh for her annual visit. I was grateful, in the abstract way you're grateful for small mercies when large disasters are unfolding, that Cora wasn't in the house for any of it. Renata confirmed what I already knew. The transfer was fraudulent. The notarization was almost certainly a falsification, and I had grounds for both a civil suit and a criminal complaint. She also told me something I hadn't considered. If your husband knew about this, and based on what you described he clearly did, then he may be liable as a co-conspirator, she said. That changes the nature of your marriage situation significantly. You mean I need a divorce attorney? I think you need to talk to one, yes. Soon. I hired Paulette Wren the following Monday. She was a family law attorney out of Pittsburgh who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving shared business assets. She had a voice like a tax audit and the warmest eyes I'd ever seen on someone who spent her days dismantling marriages for a living. At our first meeting, she told me to document everything, change my email password, and under no circumstances discuss settlement with Dennis or Gerald directly. The forgery gives you tremendous leverage, she said, but only if you use it correctly. I asked her what correctly meant. It means you don't blow it on anger, she said, which I can already tell is going to be your biggest challenge. She wasn't wrong. The 6 weeks after that were a particular kind of hell that I don't have a clean word for. Dennis came back to the house twice to collect things. Each time he had Gerald on the phone, I could hear the old man's dry voice leaking through the speaker, coaching Dennis on what to say and what not to say. Gerald had hired his own attorney, a man named Clifton Marsh, who had a reputation in Allegheny Falls for making problems disappear through attrition. Marsh sent Renata a letter, suggesting that the transfer document was the result of a clerical misunderstanding and offering to reverse the transfer in exchange for a mutual release of claims. Renata called me after she read the letter, and I could hear, underneath her professional restraint, something that sounded almost like delight. "They're scared," she said. "Good," I said. I wasn't sleeping. I'd lost 8 pounds without trying. I was running my brokerage on 4 hours of sleep a night and 2 cups of coffee that I drank standing over the kitchen sink, because I couldn't make myself sit at that table anymore. The one where Dennis had held his hand flat over Gerald's folder. I kept replaying that gesture in my mind, that smooth, practiced closing of the folder, and wondering how many times he'd made that same gesture over the years. How many things he'd covered up before I could see them. Cora came home from my mother's and I held it together in front of her. I told her Daddy was staying at Grandpa Gerald's for a little while because they were working on something together. She accepted this with the same precise skepticism she applied to everything. "What are they working on?" she asked. "Business stuff," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her 6-year-old face that was too old for 6. A careful assessment, a reading of my expression. "Okay," she said, and went to her room to read, and I stood in the hallway and pressed the back of my hand against my mouth until the urge to cry passed. The lowest point came on a Thursday in late May. I was driving back from a client meeting when Renata called to tell me that Gerald's attorney had filed a motion arguing that the jointly held rental duplex on Mercer Street should be included in a broader business restructuring, essentially trying to pull it into the orbit of Greer Capital Horizon before I could get a court to freeze assets. The motion was aggressive and probably wouldn't succeed, but fighting it would cost time and money. I pulled into a parking lot behind a dollar store on Route 8 and sat there for a while with the engine running. I had a 6-year-old daughter. I had a brokerage that was still standing but under strain. I had a husband who had let his father forge my name on a legal document and then looked me in the face and said it wasn't what I thought. I had a mother-in-law, technically a stepmother-in-law, who had always looked at me with a particular kind of sideways contempt, the kind that assumes every woman who earns her own money must have done something undeserving to get it. And I had a father-in-law who had been calculating the angles on every relationship in his life since before I was born, and who had clearly decided that I was a liability to be managed. I sat in that parking lot for 22 minutes. I counted them on the dashboard clock. Then my phone rang again. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't answer. "Is this Nora Greer?" A woman's voice, older, careful. "Yes," I said. "My name is Dolores Kwan. You don't know me. I was the administrative manager at Greer Industrial Holdings for 11 years, until Gerald terminated me last October." A pause. "I've been reading the county filings, the ones involving Greer Capital Horizon." I sat up straighter. "I have documents," Dolores said, "from my time there. Records of transactions that I believe were structured specifically to defraud co-owners and business partners. I kept copies because I was worried about my own liability." Another pause, shorter. "I want to talk to an attorney. Your attorney, if that's possible. I think what I have might be relevant to your situation." I stared through the windshield at the back wall of the dollar store. A crow was sitting on the dumpster, watching me with the same flat assessment Cora had given me in the hallway. "Can you meet tomorrow?" I said. "Yes," said Dolores Kwan. "I was hoping you'd say that." I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in 6 weeks. Something had shifted inside me. Not hope exactly, but its harder, more functional cousin. Purpose. The kind that doesn't come from feeling better about your situation. The kind that comes from deciding, quietly and without ceremony, that you are done being the person things happen to. Cora was asleep when I got home. I checked on her, stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, looking at her dark hair spread across the pillow, and I made her a promise she couldn't hear. That whatever was coming, The court filings, the asset battles, the long, ugly dissolution of a 13-year marriage. She was not going to lose her home. She was not going to lose her stability. And nobody, not Gerald, not Connie, not Dennis with his careful hand on closed folders, was going to take what was hers. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have anticipated, was that the threat to Cora wasn't going to come from a courtroom. It was going to come from inside my own house. On an afternoon in April of the following year, when I walked through my own front door and heard a sound that stopped my blood cold. The sound of a belt. I heard it before I saw it. I'd come home 40 minutes early from a showing on Hartwell Street. The buyers had canceled last minute. Bad traffic on Route 8, a wasted afternoon. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a second with the engine off, just tired. The kind of tired that sits in your back teeth. I grabbed my bag and my phone and pushed through the front door, and the sound hit me before I even got my keys out of the lock. A sharp, cracking snap. Then Cora's voice, high and airless. Then Connie's voice, loud and ugly, filling the hallway like something spilled. "Useless girl! Your cousin barely touched you. You want to die?" Another snap. I didn't walk to the kitchen. I don't remember walking at all. I was in the hallway, and then I was in the doorway, and then I was seeing it. Connie standing over Cora with Gerald's leather belt doubled in her fist. Cora crouched against the base of the cabinet with both arms wrapped around her own knees, her face a red, airless mask. The welt on the back of her thigh was already rising. Cora had gone past crying. She'd gone to that place children go when the pain exceeds the body's ability to respond to it with sound. I saw the stool before I thought about it. The wooden one with the round seat that we kept by the kitchen counter. My hand found it, and then it left my hands, and then there was that sound. The hollow crack of wood against the wall, inches from Connie's head. And she stumbled backward into the doorframe, clutching it, her face rewriting itself in real time from rage to something I'd never seen on her before. Fear. Pure animal fear. I stood in my own kitchen breathing like I'd sprinted a mile, hands shaking, and my voice came out low and flat in a way that didn't even sound like me. "Looks like you're tired of living," I said. Connie's mouth was open. No sound came out of it. I stepped around her and I crouched down in front of Cora, and I put both hands on her face, very gently, the way you hold something you're terrified of breaking. "Hey," I said. "Hey, I'm here. I'm right here." Cora blinked at me and then she started to cry. That delayed, heaving cry that means the body has finally decided it's safe to feel it. And I pulled her into me and held her there on the kitchen floor while Connie stood in the doorway, making sounds that I refused to listen to. "She pushed Marcus," Connie finally said, her voice still shaky. "She pushed her cousin and he hit his head on the—" "Get out of my house," I said. "I was disciplining her. Children need—" "Connie!" I looked up at her from the floor. I want to be clear about what was in my voice when I said the next thing, because it wasn't anger. Anger had already left. What was left was something older and quieter and considerably more dangerous. "If you say one more word in this kitchen, I will call the police before you reach your car. And then I will call Gerald and tell him what I just watched his wife do to my 6-year-old daughter. And then I will call my attorney and add this to the list of reasons you and your husband should be very, very afraid of me right now. So I am going to say it one more time. Get out of my house." She got out. I heard the front door close. I sat on the kitchen floor with Cora in my lap for a long time, rocking her slightly, saying nothing, until her breathing slowed and flattened into something normal. Then I checked the welt on the back of her thigh. It was bad. A raised red stripe, the kind that would bruise by morning. I photographed it with my phone. I photographed both sides. I sent the photos to Renata and to Paulette Wren with a single text that said, Connie Greer struck Cora with a belt while babysitting at my home. I have documentation. Call me. Both of them called within 4 minutes. I want to explain something about the weeks that followed, because people who haven't been through it tend to imagine legal processes as dramatic and fast, like they are on television. They are not. They are slow and grinding, and require you to produce the same information in 5 slightly different formats for 5 slightly different officials. And the whole time you are doing this, you are also running a brokerage and raising a child and trying to remember to eat. What I can tell you is this. Renata filed for an emergency restraining order against Connie Greer the next morning. It was granted by that afternoon. Connie was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Cora or of our home. Gerald's attorney, Clifton Marsh, called Renata to protest and was informed, in Renata's precise and merciless way, that the photographs of Cora's injuries had already been forwarded to Allegheny County Child Protective Services, and that any further contact from the Greer family toward my daughter would be treated as attempted interference. CPS opened an investigation. A caseworker named Marcus Ewan, no relation to Connie's nephew, just a coincidence of names that I found grimly appropriate, came to the house and spoke with me and, separately, with Cora. Cora told him, in her exact and unsparing 6-year-old way, that Grandma Connie had hit her with the long thing from Grandpa's pants, because she had bumped into her cousin Marcus by accident and he had bumped his head on the counter and started crying. Cora said she had apologized and that Grandma Connie had said sorry wasn't good enough. Marcus Ewan wrote all of this down, with the careful expression of someone who has heard worse and knows it. The CPS investigation ran alongside the divorce proceedings like 2 parallel trains on tracks that kept intersecting. Paulette Wren used the belt incident the way a carpenter uses a level, to make everything else align. The forgery case, the fraudulent transfer, the asset maneuvering through Greer Capital Horizon, and now documented physical abuse of a minor in the care of Gerald's wife. She laid it all out in a single motion that was, as she described it to me afterward, the legal equivalent of handing someone a bill for every favor they ever thought they got for free. Dolores Kwan's documents were the piece that completed it. I met with her twice more after that first phone call, once with Renata present, and once with both Renata and Paulette. Dolores was a small, precise woman in her late 60s, who had spent 11 years managing Gerald Greer's administrative operations with the quiet, meticulous competence of someone who is very good at their job and very aware that their employer is not entirely legal. She had kept copies of everything: transaction records, internal memos, correspondence between Gerald and Leonard Pollard, the notary with the irregular stamp, going back 4 years. The pattern was clear. Gerald had been using fraudulent notarizations to transfer co-owned assets into his own entities for years. My commercial lot was not the first. It was the most recent, and the most recent is always the easiest to prosecute. Renata filed a civil fraud complaint against Gerald Greer and Greer Capital Horizon in Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas. The district attorney's office, which had been copied on the recorder of deeds referral from months earlier, opened a separate criminal inquiry. Leonard Pollard, the notary, received his own set of legal problems and, as Renata put it with characteristic understatement, became cooperative very quickly. Dennis called me once during all of this. It was a Thursday evening in June, nearly 2 months after the belt incident. Cora was asleep. I answered because I'd promised Paulette I would document all contact. "I didn't know about Connie," he said. "With Cora. I swear to you, I didn't know she would do that." I believe you, I said. And I did, actually. Dennis was a lot of things, but I didn't think he would have knowingly left our daughter with someone dangerous. He was conflict avoidant and weak, and thoroughly dominated by his father. But he loved Cora in the real, specific way that you can't perform. That doesn't change what happened. I know, he said. He was quiet for a moment. My father's going to lose everything, isn't he? I don't know, I said. But he's going to lose the things he took. Another silence. Nora, he said, I'm sorry. For all of it. The folder, letting him. I'm sorry. I thought about the kitchen table, his hand flat on the closed folder. I thought about 22 minutes in a parking lot behind a dollar store on Route 8. I thought about Cora's face on the kitchen floor, that terrible, airless mask. I know you are, I said. It's not enough, but I know you are. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand for a while, and then I put it down and went to check on Cora. And she was sleeping with her arm thrown over her face the way she always did, deeply and without worry, the way children sleep when they feel safe. I stood in the doorway and I breathed. The civil case settled 14 months later. Gerald Greer was ordered to reverse the transfer of the commercial lot, pay restitution of $180,000 plus legal fees and interest, and disgorge an additional $94,000 in profits from two other fraudulent transfers that Dolores's documents had surfaced, transactions involving business partners other than me who had, once the case became public, come forward with their own claims. Greer Capital Horizon was dissolved by court order. Leonard Pollard surrendered his notary commission, paid a fine, and avoided prison by testifying against Gerald in the criminal proceeding. Gerald Greer pled no contest to one count of real estate fraud. He was 72 years old by then, in fair health, and the judge sentenced him to 3 years of probation, a substantial fine, and mandatory restitution. No prison. I won't pretend that felt entirely fair. But I watched Gerald Greer stand in that courtroom and hear a judge tell him, in the specific and public language of the law, that what he had done was wrong, and I watched his face during it, that dry, asphalt-eyed face, and I saw something happen to it that I don't think had ever happened to it before. I saw him understand that he had miscalculated, that he had treated me like a variable he could control, and he had been wrong, and the wrongness had cost him more than money. Connie's CPS case resulted in a founded finding of child abuse. She was not prosecuted criminally. The DA declined to pursue charges given her age and lack of criminal history, but the founded finding is a matter of permanent record. She has no legal access to Cora. She never will. The divorce was finalized 11 months after I first walked into the Recorder of Deeds office and saw my forged signature on a stranger's document. Dennis and I divided the house equity, the rental duplex proceeds, and our joint savings according to the settlement Paulette negotiated. I kept my brokerage. I kept the house, bought out Dennis's share at fair market value, which I could do because the restitution from Gerald's fraud case had put money back in my accounts that had been effectively stolen. I kept Cora's school, her room, the maple tree in the backyard that she liked to sit under with her books on warm afternoons. Dennis moved to Pittsburgh. He got an apartment near the river and a job with a commercial real estate firm that had no connection to his father. We have a custody arrangement that is, all things considered, functional. Cora sees him every other weekend and for 2 weeks in the summer. She is careful with him in the way that children are careful with people they love and don't entirely trust. And I think that's honest, and I don't try to fix it for her. The welt on Cora's thigh faded completely within 3 weeks. She never brought up Connie again after the caseworker's visit. Children have a remarkable ability to file things away, to continue, Not because they've forgotten, but because they're still in the process of becoming. And becoming requires forward motion. I tried to learn that from her. My brokerage is doing well. We added a fifth agent last spring. I have a listing on a renovated duplex on Hartwell Street that I expect to close by the end of the month. I still know every street, every zoning quirk, every flood-prone basement in a 2-county radius. I still drive Route 8 past that dollar store, and I still think about those 22 minutes in the parking lot. And I think, that was the last time I sat still while something was being done to me. Allegheny Falls still looks better in the right afternoon light. The maples on our block are enormous now, leafed out full and heavy. Cora sits under them with chapter books that are too advanced for her grade level, and when I ask her what she's reading, she explains the plot to me in complete, precise sentences, and then looks at me to make sure I understood. She has my stubbornness. I used to worry about that. I don't anymore. There is a particular kind of woman that people like Gerald Greer build their entire strategy around. The kind who will absorb the cost of someone else's greed quietly, because the alternative seems too loud, too disruptive, too much. I was that woman for a long time. I spackled the cracks and smiled at the kitchen table, and told myself the closed folder was none of my business. What I know now is this. The moment I stopped being that woman was not the moment I threw the stool. It was earlier than that. It was the moment I sat in that parking lot, counted 22 minutes on the dashboard clock, and decided that I was done being the person things happened to. The stool was just the moment I stopped being quiet about it.